Runaway Steamroller by Ian Robinson. It all began with the children encountering the roller in its shed at Matson's quarry. It was a Saturday afternoon, so the quarryman had gone home for the day. The roller was quietly steaming, glugging contentedly to itself, warmed by a full boiler. None of the children could resist climbing on board and pulling levers or turning valves. It still amazed Peter how quickly things had gone from curiosity about the roller to it careening out of the shed. A steam genie coming out of a bottle, it went on a cheerful mission of destruction. It climbed the side of the road, chewing up the hedge and breaking into the field beyond, as if, given its head, this was what it had always wanted to do. Like a pit pony released into a sweet meadow after endless toil in the dark. Steam hissing, chimney woofing, galloping along. What a laugh it had been! Very naughty, the children would probably agree, but a lark all the same. Reg had seemed unusually calm when he related to them what Mrs. Drinkwater, the farmer's wife, had told him. How she'd seen them all hanging on to the roller as it flattened a trail from Kettleshoom to Nab End, over her land, frightening her best dairy cows. Peter had suspected at the time that he'd seen the old bird out of the corner of his eye. He remembered because, at that point in the adventure, some of the children were beginning to have second thoughts. They knew they weren't in charge anymore. The roller was. Reg's voice became louder as he multitasked, lecturing them about other people's property while enthusiastically leathering their backsides with his belt. He had a genuine talent for it. Just as well, Peter thought, that he had a talent for something. In another way, Peter considered, his old man was a bit like that roller, a pent-up head of steam that, once unleashed, could wreak untold damage, except that he'd felt the roller somehow deserved a crazy afternoon destroying fences and terrorizing cows, after all its years of service to humankind. What had this clumsy monolith of a dad done for anybody? Most steamrollers live out a blameless life until one day they get dragged to the scrapyard, without ever making a run for grass. His dad seemed perpetually to trespass on the verges of trouble, a strange trait for someone who was the village bobby. Sadly for Peter, the punishment train had reached the end of the line. It was his turn. Reg spoke to him quietly, told him to bend over. Before administering the punishment, he whispered, "This is all your fault, Peter. This is what your cleverness gets you. When will you learn to leave things alone that don't belong to you?" Reg hit him 6 times, with a side order of malice, Peter thought. When it was all over, the children walked slowly up the lane, away from the scene of their punishment. Some were still crying a little. They stood by the big old ash tree that grew beside a ruined cottage and regrouped. Bernard spoke haltingly, his words interrupted by snatches of breath. "It wasn't just your fault, Pete. We were all in it, and we were all mad keen." The others nodded through tears or mumbled their agreement. David smiled, his face still red from crying. He kicked a stone across the track. "Hey, Pete! I can still see you trying to screw that steamroller's brake on. Your face was a sight." David had reached the stage where the punishment didn't really fit the crime anymore. It had no correlation with it. The wild roller ride reasserted its place as the principal event in his life so far. Peter remembered that moment all too well. He'd been in the eye of a storm, grunting, cursing, winding the handbrake, a desperate mariner fearing the shipwreck that was surely ahead. On the downslope, the brake made little difference to 12 tons of hurtling steam engine. The flywheel seemed to roll the passing landscape up like a bioscope show. The piston rods clanked, locked in service to an unhinged master. Knowing that they'd reached the point of no return, Peter pushed his glasses up his nose, took a deep breath and shouted, "Abandon ship!" They'd all watched as the roller carried on down the field without its cargo of children. Left to its own ideas, it flattened another hedge, it stampeded more cows, and then destroyed an old wooden barn. Eventually it came to rest inside the wreckage. The safety valves roared plumes of triumph. "See! This is what rollers could do! Behold the power of steam!" The children giggled at the delicious intoxication of it all, knowing that they would have to pay for their enjoyment at some point. They headed home slowly that afternoon, with no remorse, only a feeling that their dad now had an excuse to unleash his demons upon them. Just why the roller was in its shed at Matson's quarry with a full head of steam was a question no one wanted to answer afterwards. Put away by the driver, Sandy Olorenshaw, that Saturday lunchtime, it had spent the morning powering a crusher, interminably grinding stone into chippings. Sandy had oiled the machine, then polished the dust off its green lacquer and brass boiler bands, before carefully reversing it into the shed. He was the only man at Matson's with full responsibility for the roller, and he took it seriously, keeping the machine smart. It's true, though, that he was to go on holiday that afternoon. Perhaps he'd been thinking about the week ahead, walking along the prom at Rill with his new wife. She'd be wearing that dress, cream with large roses on it, that she'd got from Manchester. Oh, she looked so fine in that. They wouldn't have her mother with them at the guest house either, all week. The thing was, the roller was more or less undamaged after the trip down to the barn, apart from some scratches and a bent awning. Proper British engineering, that. It carried on for another 30 years until some chap from Buxton purchased it for preservation. Sandy had got in a bit of bother when he returned to the quarry after his week of marital bliss in Rill, but everything was soon forgotten, except by the children. To them the roller's jamboree of freedom was a glowing sunlit window on the glory of their childhoods. Reggie's punishment, the forthcoming war, or the privations of prison for some of them, would never extinguish the fun they'd had that afternoon.